World Press Freedom Day around the world is on a fixed day, May the 3rd, but we brought that forward here so that we can debate this live topic in good time before Election Day here. UNESCO is the United Nations agency which is responsible for issues of press freedom, and the UK National Commission for UNESCO, together with the UK Press Freedom Network, has organised this event. So to start with, we're going to call on Harry Reeves, who's the Secretary General of the UK National Commission, to do the honours, to encourage the journalism of the future, because the student journalism competition is organised by UNESCO, and we have the winner here today. So Harry, floor's yours.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be presenting the award for this year's World Press Freedom Day Student Journalism Competition. This is the 4th year running that the UK National Commission for UNESCO has partnered with the Press Freedom Network to hold this competition. We had an excellent entry and a very deserving winner. This competition and the debate that you're about to take part in forms an important part of the UK National Commission for UNESCO's work on press freedom. World Press Freedom Day is an opportunity to reflect upon and to promote the fundamental principles of press freedom. But of course, our defence of a free press can't be limited to one day, which is why UNESCO, as the lead UN agency on this issue, promotes freedom of the press and freedom of expression as a basic human right. UNESCO rightly sees the free flow of information as central to both good governance and democracy and its overall mission of promoting peace and development. The goal of the student journalism competition is a simple but an important one: to encourage students in the UK to consider and define some of the current and emerging challenges facing freedom of the press, both within the UK and globally. And the winning entry does this brilliantly. And I would encourage you all to visit unesco.org.uk to read that winning entry if you haven't been able to do so already. So without further delay, let me present this year's award to Hannah Marshall, who's currently studying an MA in Media at Southampton Solent University, for her article on the impact of unregulated new media on the unfolding UK election. Hannah, please come and receive your award.
Congratulations, Hannah, and I hope you'll take part in the debate this morning yourself. Now, just quickly from the chair, as Harry Reeves was saying, Press Freedom Day prompts us all to reflect on the harsh reality that in many parts of the world, press freedom is an impossible dream because the mass media really are controlled by political interests or by self-serving business interests. And it's particularly alarming in the past year that the number of media workers killed around the world has reached the terrible toll of more than 130. The monitoring organizations on the ground have evidence that year after year, violent attacks and patterns of oppression against journalists are growing worse, not better. Political leaders here in the West express their deep concern that a climate of impunity has spread and protects many of the shadowy figures behind this epidemic of targeted killings and assaults from being brought to justice. Yet how strong really is the political will to confront and end it? Where's the sustained public outcry, and are our media really following it closely? Journalists in countries like Russia, Mexico, or the Philippines who face these real dangers in doing their jobs call for people in more fortunate places to speak up more and force their governments to uphold the rule of law and protect them. The issue of violence against journalists is, I think, starting to be more widely discussed, but does it deserve more attention. That's at least something for us to think about today. But on with today's debate, which is also, of course, about how fairly our own democracy works. We've got a classical debate format. On my right, the two proposers of the motion, that unregulated political comment online helps the democratic process. They are Sir Robert Worcester, founder of the Murray Polling Organisation, one of the sharpest political analysts around for as long as most of us can remember, and his partner, who'll be here in just a moment, he's stuck on a train, Sunny Hundal, editor of the online magazine Liberal Conspiracy and a high-profile blogger himself. On the other side, polishing their arguments like blades of steel, speaking against the motion, Caroline Thompson, BBC's chief operating officer and a champion of the values, of course, of public service broadcasting, and Stephen Bennett, professor of communications at the University of Westminster and an authority on media regulation, ownership and ethics. Welcome to you all. Now, to set the stage, you're first going to see a world premiere of a very short video made for us by BBC's College of Journalism. It gives a taste of the extra something that the brash online media now bring to our daily intake of information and comment about our politicians and public figures. Tom Frederick's video focuses on online media and how they led the revelations about two particular stories: Lord Levy's attack on Gordon Brown's leadership of New Labour and Prince Harry's outbursts in the army. Did I say Bennett? I got that wrong. I can't find it written down. Sorry. It's worth waiting for, I promise.
I really am saddened to see the polls at the moment, what's happening with the party, the bickering within the party, and I'm saddened to see that somehow there does not appear to be that strong leadership that the Labour Party so desperately needs.
Good afternoon. Prince Harry has apologised for using racist language about an army colleague. He can be heard calling the soldier Paki on video footage which has been published by a Sunday newspaper.
Hello, little Paki friend. Ahmed.
He's believed to have been Ahmed Raga Khan, who is from Pakistan and was named the Outstanding Overseas Cadet by the Queen at Sandhurst, Britain's elite military college, also attended by the Prince.
Your reaction to what Prince Harry has said?
Well, obviously we're deeply offended by his racist slur. Obviously we condemn Prince Harry unreservedly. Anyone who uses racist language in whatever intention, whether you intended to offend or not, should be condemned.
Well, it is obviously a completely unacceptable thing to say, and it's right that he has apologised.
I've got to go, Okay, bye.
Yeah.
God save you. Yeah, that's great. All right, see you, bye.
All in all, it certainly isn't an image of the third in line to the British throne that will please either him, his family, or the army.
Thank you very much to the College of Journalism. Now, the rules you probably know are these. Each of our main speakers has up to 6 minutes to make their case, with Bob Worcester going first for the motion, followed by Caroline Thompson opposing it. At that point, I may take just a few points from the floor to get the flavour of the room. Then it's the same pattern for the other two main speakers. When each main speaker is getting close to time, they'll hear a tinkling sound, cue sound. That's the one. Yeah, the trouble clip, to indicate that they should wrap up within 30 seconds. At some point, the two other named speakers seated in the audience will also make their pitch on each side of the argument. And if we keep to time, everyone in the room who wishes will have a chance to join in from the floor. At the end, we'll take a vote by a show of hands on the motion that unregulated political comment online helps the democratic process. Now, to start with, I ask you, Sir Bob Worcester, please to propose the motion.
Colleagues, I believe that unregulated political comment online helps the democratic process. Lord knows something should be done. Only 13% of the public trust politicians to tell the truth. 7 people in 10 believe the present system of governing Britain needs improvement. The democratic process in this country needs all the help it can get. I contend that unregulated political comment everywhere, including online, can help the democratic process. We have too much regulation in this country already. Too much regulation by government, too many laws, too many elected politicians, and too many petty officials who believe that if it moves, it should be regulated, or even if it doesn't move. We can agree that some regulation of the media is necessary, but does it have to be by newspaper proprietors and editors under the facade of self-regulation? To go to law benefits nobody but the lawyers. Their costs, if they lose, are paid by the shareholders, while our costs, even if we win, are partly, if not entirely, paid by us. And if we don't, entirely by us. It's a mug's game. Even yet, we have to thank Simon Singh, his eyes open, for fighting and winning so far the good fight for us all. Or by self-regulation by the BBC, where BBC producers' guidelines lay down the law without external consultation or a serious appeal process. Short of going to law, again, their costs, if we lose, are paid by us as license fee payers, while our costs, even if we win, are partly, if not entirely, paid by us along with their costs as license fee payers. We're living in an over-regulated society. I would argue for less regulation, not more. Political comment, unregulated, very brave, Minister. Include the loonies and the loudmouths, the biased and the bigoted. So long as they don't encourage or condone the breaking of law, other than by civil disobedience, and willing to go to jail for breach of other civil liberties, then on the grounds of civil liberties, I would support their right of free speech online offensive, though I personally might find their views. I'm talking about political comment, not foul language, not abusive language. As was said earlier, it's a basic civil liberty. It's a basic human right. Now, I come from America, but I've lived here for 40 years. Civil liberties in America, where I served on the National Committee of the American Civil Liberties Union, are guaranteed by the Constitution of the United States and the accompanying Bill of Rights. I'd like to remind you what it says. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. That's a First Amendment right. We don't have that here in Britain. If Parliament should decide, by the way, how many read The Guardian? I suspect it might be the case. If we don't have that here in Britain, if Parliament should decide to close down The Guardian tomorrow, it would not be published. The framers of the Constitution of the United States idea of the freedom of the press may be close to what is in Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights, but is not yet fully tested in the courts here and indeed there. We know from Lord Bingham's speech last month at City University, it'll be a long time before the new Supreme Court will more clearly define the principles. And even then, the new Supreme Court, so-called, ruling could be overruled, and no doubt would be, by Strasbourg. So there are four main reasons I support unregulated political comment, because it helps the democratic process. First is that the country that I am proud to have immigrated to boasts that it is the mother of parliaments and aspires to lead the world in being and being seen to be being a democratic society. In the table of global press freedom rankings for 2009, the United Kingdom ranked 31st, below Iceland, Estonia, and Liechtenstein, and after St. Vincent, the Czech Republic, and even, would you believe, the United States. Britain, I contend, should strive to be in the top 10. Second is to strike a blow for liberty and freedom of the individual. We're overregulated by the health and safety, and by laws which keep supermarkets from selling us aspirin in family-sized bottles. We have become, as the Washington Post observed, the world's premier surveillance society with the most CCTVs per person of any country in the world under a labor government. There are the little Hitlers at airport security who know they can be rude as they like, and they're not required by law to give either their name or their badge number. And now in NHS hospitals, anyone on staff can, if they have the nous, access our personal medical records. John Campter's book reminds us of all the government departments which enjoy the right to snoop. The list could go on and on. John also argues that the very high cost of libel actions have made British libel laws singularly attractive to claimants and singularly pernicious to journalists and writers. Big Brother's watching. That, when I wrote that, reminded me of the cartoon of the dog sitting in front of the computer screen explaining to the other dog, the nice thing about the internet is they don't know I'm a dog. Third, I'm right on time. Thank you. It's a nicer tone, wasn't it? In its submission to the PCC, the Media Standards Trust Ipsos Mori survey found the public prefers an independent self-regulatory body, 52%, to a newspaper industry complaints body, 8%, or a regulatory body set up by the government, 17%. We trust ourselves a great deal more than we trust either the government or newspaper proprietors. And fourth, it's the internet, stupid. Regulation of the internet won't work. Like banning the publication of opinion polls, it's a non-starter. The internet crosses national boundaries. Bloggers can operate in one country with lax laws and or lax enforcement and blog away worldwide, and already do. I move.
Thank you very much. Well, we seem to have a majority of Guardian readers in the room, but who will win the vote? I now call on Caroline Thompson to oppose the motion.
Thank you very much, and colleagues, it's good to be with you today and to be celebrating, even in advance, World Press Freedom Day, which is a very important occasion, and I would like to join in echoing William's remarks, particularly about the number of deaths of journalists we've experienced and media workers we've experienced over the last year. But to be clear at the beginning, as I speak on this motion, I'm not speaking here in favour of censorship or against free speech. I do not favour regulation of the internet. As Robert said, it is both impractical and undesirable. Free speech is a cornerstone of the internet. It's been one of the most important advances in modern democracy, and it would be wrong to change that. What I am speaking in favour of is widespread, rigorous, stimulating debate, but a debate which ensures that all voices are heard, the weak as well as the strong, the uncertain as well as the opinionated, whatever their political or economic clout, a debate which can take place against the background of a clear, trusted public space, one which allows context, analysis, and explanation. For unregulated content alone can degenerate into an echo chamber of unstructured opinion, and at worst, a cacophony of abuse, which leaves voters and readers sometimes interested, yes, but their appetite whetted, they're no better off. They have no measure against which to judge what they're reading, and they are left confused and often confused and concerned. My contention, therefore, is that unregulated content on its own would damage our democracy. Dipping into blogs, Twitter, or the hundreds of comments that are posted on the BBC's Have Your Say, The Guardian's Comment is Free, the Daily Mail or Guido Fawkes, the stuff you saw in the video here, I'm often struck by the engagement and energy which is shown in these blogs, but also how much partisan vitriol and occasionally libelous inaccuracy can be found, with no sense of offer of redress to those libelled, by the way. This mix of the informed and the uninformed, the angry and the angry, can't be relied on to illuminate or advance the debate. Indeed, I'm often reminded of Godwin's law, quote, that as an online discussion grows longer, the probability of a comparison involving Nazi of the Hitler or Hitlers grows closer. Regulated, accountable and impartial content is needed to sit alongside this comment. And that's exactly, if I'm allowed to speak parochially for the BBC for a minute, what we seek to offer licence fee payers. Providing independent, impartial and authoritative journalism the electorate can trust is one of the main reasons the BBC exists. It's at the heart of what we do. And research shows it works. Research which I'm sure Bob would respect and recognise. At the last election, 2/3 of those who watched or listened to the BBC felt better able to make up their minds on controversial issues. And last month, the Global Trust Barometer, published by the PR firm Edelman's, not a piece of BBC research, showed that 72% said that they trusted the BBC. And this level, the Guardian has shown that this level of trust is going up in the BBC. Now, this isn't something we in the BBC should be taking for granted. It's something we have to work for. It's a level of confidence in us, which is an awesome responsibility and which we have to rise to and fill. Our obligation is to provide an independent space where the big debates can take place free from political or commercial influence. In this public space, with clear boundaries, everyone can have access to the lifeblood of a healthy democratic debate, impartial news, information, and above all, trustworthy analysis. This public space extends to online. The same guidelines as those for TV and radio programmes apply to the BBC editorial content on all of the bbc.co.uk sites. If we wouldn't broadcast something on radio or television, it should not be put online. Similarly, however, newspaper websites are held to the same standards as their print editions by the PCC, and there was an interesting recent ruling about the Spectator to this effect. And if we make mistakes, both regulators and the public hold us accountable. Impartial, regulated coverage of the political process is a core part of what public service broadcasters do. And this allows the public, and should allow the public, to see and judge firsthand the work of their elected representatives, unmediated by either us or any bloggers or anyone else with any other interest, and ensure that we have a healthy and informed democracy. This is especially important, of course, during an election. And I'm thinking here not just of the leaders' debates, although these are obviously an important use of public space and a very welcome innovation in how we're fighting elections. But another example of this, which you may not be so familiar with, is our Democracy Live site, which we launched in November last year. This site offers live and on-demand video coverage of the UK's national political institutions and of the European Parliament. It provides unmediated content to the public, who can find out about their elected representatives and the decision-making process. But it costs a lot to do, and only a regulated broadcaster can do it. But this site doesn't sit in isolation. Thousands of armchair politicos use Democracy Live every week, not just to monitor their politicians, their own constituency MP, and the national leaders, but also they link to and embed clips on their blogs, Facebook or Twitter pages. You can see them now, and alongside unregulated personal commentary on what they've seen. So my That was a very quick minute. So last paragraph. So my contention is that the internet has enabled this new symbiotic relationship between public service broadcasters' regulated and impartial content and the passionate, unregulated commentary and analysis that has grown up around it. It's the new world at its best, a marriage of the old and the new. It's this complementary ecosystem that is the real transformative benefit to democracy in our country and the one we should support. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Now, we have got time for a very quick break to take a couple of points from the floor if people want to speak. Perhaps not our named speakers at this stage, because that would interrupt the flow from the main speakers. But if there's anybody burning to respond to these points, on the one side, trust the people, even if opinions are offensive, they should be allowed to be unregulated. On the other, we have the accusation of a cacophony which leaves people confused and that can also be libelous and often partisan. So if anybody's burning to speak, you can put your hand up right away. Otherwise, we'll move on to the other two main speakers. Okay. Sonny Handel, thank you very much for arriving actually spot on time in the end. 6 minutes to second the motion, please.
I hope you don't mind if I sit down, because I really can't stand on speaking up. I'm a political blogger, I'm not a speaker. My colleague made the philosophical case for allowing unregulated comment online, and I'll make a more practical case. The press in the UK has always been partisan. In many ways, that is its beauty. It can be aggressive and pugnacious. But there's an underlying assumption that it is promoting democratic engagement. Most of the time, however, newspapers are simply carrying out their own agendas in favour of particular goals. Daily Mail has one, Telegraph has one, and The Guardian has another agenda. Well, what if these stories are wrong? Who points that out? Who can challenge that? Certainly not the media industry. I'll give you some examples. Last year, The Sun published a front-page story about a Jewish hit list, which was supposedly carried out by a group of Muslims on an internet message board. Through the investigation of various bloggers, it eventually turned out to be untrue. The Sun had to withdraw its story. The Daily Mail had to withdraw the same story, as did lots of other organizations. Eventually, the Sun had to apologize twice, and the PCC made a ruling against the Sun, saying that the story was entirely concocted. I'll give you another example, a more recent example. Jonathan Leake in the Sunday Times became the subject of a lot of vitriol on various science blogs over claims made in the Sunday Times about climate change. A claim made a few weeks ago that the Amazonian rainforest was not going to go away by 40% a year was challenged by various science blogs, and eventually the reader from the Sunday Times, a member of the Sunday Times, had to call the blog in the blog to point out that the Sunday Times was looking into the story. So the point I'm trying to make here is that blogs can do their own research, they can expose stories and become potential journalists. That has been sporadic in the past, but this is increasingly the future. The aim of blogs in many ways is to force the media industry to become more rigorous. We're not necessarily trying to take its place, but a lot of us are quite annoyed with the way the media industry works, and we want to challenge their assumptions and challenge their agendas. I'll give you second point in favor of blogs is campaigning. The web allows people to form campaigns to organize around their interests and take part in these campaigns. That is democracy at its heart. They join Facebook groups, they retweet court injunctions, they tell the elected officials that they love the NHS. I'll give you an example of that one. A few months ago, we were told that Daniel Hannan had gone over, a British MEP had gone over to the United States and criticized the NHS on Fox News. That story was circulated across blogs and on Twitter, and eventually it created such a storm that the Conservative Party had to issue various statements saying that they love the NHS. And as you may also know, that David Cameron unveiled a advertising campaign on that basis. I'll give you another example. I was part of a campaign to stop Rod Little being editor of The Independent. That was a campaign spearheaded by my blog as well as some other blogs and a Facebook group. Eventually, Rod Little did not become editor of The Independent. The point is that people get involved in people get interested in politics by virtue of campaigning for issues they care about. That is the whole point of online political blogging, to get more people involved, to find ways that they can campaign together, to get them campaigning and working on issues that they care about. My colleagues say that people who have been libeled have no redress. That is simply untrue. In fact, even Guido Fawkes, and the non-political blogger, has used libel law against his opponents, including myself. And there's been lots of cases where ordinary bloggers have been taken to court. There is currently a case going on right now about involving 2 political bloggers. My colleague, my opponent, has also said that there is a lot of partisan vitriol online. I think that's good. That's a good thing, and I'll tell you why. Across liberal democracies, we welcome and embrace multiple political parties. We do so on the basis that partisanship is like competition in a free market. It keeps the opposition on its toes. It gives us real choice, and that political parties partly act as checks on each other through the intention of winning power. Blogging is no different. It is loud. It can look like a no-holds-barred boxing competition, but there are rules and etiquettes. There are conventions, and there are political alliances. And actually, it is good that it's highly politically partisan. It attracts the most politically dedicated people who spend ages looking at Hansard or reading through legislation they passionately care about. That is important for a good functioning democracy. These people are the goldmine for political parties. They are the foot soldiers. They're the ones who can spot what opposition parties are trying to hide. The MP's expenses scandal was spearheaded by a woman who was trying to push FOI requests as far as possible. Last line. These are still the early days of political blogging. It is unlikely that political blogging will get any less aggressive or partisan. But this is good for our democracy because political bloggers will eventually also end up as acting as checks on the political system. Thank you.
I think the lines are getting more clearly drawn. And finally, I call on Stephen Barnett to say why you think this House should vote against the motion.
Thank you. I think we should remind ourselves actually what the motion says. We're talking about unregulated political comment. We're not talking about online journalism. And we're talking about something that helps the democratic process. And I'm opposing this. I think it's easy to oppose, actually, because quite simply it confuses furthering the democratic process with the right to free speech, and they are categorically not the same thing. Now, my first taste of unregulated political comment was around 40 years ago at Speaker's Corner, not very far from here, a little enclave of Hyde Park, devoted to anybody with a soapbox and an opinion who wanted to vent their spleen at anything under the sun, really. It was a place of contrasting and usually extremist views, lots of people shaking their fists, insulting each other, angrily denouncing other people as traitors, fascists, communists, the odd joke, and greatly fascinating for passing tourists. In fact, there were a few observers at the time who alleged that this was democracy in action. Well, of course, it was nothing of the sort. It was a wonderful manifestation of the privilege of free speech, which is something, as Sir Robert says, that we should never take for granted. But we should not confuse opportunities for free speech with opportunities that actually enhance the democratic process. Speaker's Corner was actually nothing more than a glorified alfresco saloon bar. Completely unrepresentative, dominated by men, exploited by extremists. It excluded almost everyone who didn't live in London, and it was utterly insignificant to the vast majority of the population who either weren't able or weren't interested in participating very often in the freezing cold. Wonderful fun for participants who loved the sound of their own voices. Democracy, it wasn't. And now Speaker's Corner has gone online, a virtual environment every bit as amenable to free expression as Hyde Park soapbox, and with all the same problems that make it unsustainable as a genuine force for democracy. It excludes at least 1/3 of the population who don't have access to computers or broadband. It excludes the elderly and the technophobic. It's equally dominated by aggressive macho men trading insults and reveling in the sound of their own opinions. Arguably, it disenfranchises women. It's completely ignored by the vast majority of the population who are far more interested in Facebook chats and celebrity gossip. Moreover, and I think this is the crucial point, it abides by no rules of truth-telling or professional journalism. Doesn't mean it should be regulated, but let's remember that this is a time, as I'm sure most people in this room understand, when seasoned journalists, people who are paid to seek out truth, to find and disseminate facts, who are held accountable to a professional code of conduct, are losing their jobs at a terrifying rate. At the same time, the online world is awash with partial truths and uncorroborated versions of events, often deliberately distorted by those pursuing their own political agenda. Now, I used to believe, like our opponents, in the real democratic potential of online blogging. I'm afraid I've spent an inordinate amount of time, my wife will testify to this, scanning the blogosphere for any semblance of reasoned political debate or factual enlightenment. Very occasionally, I come across a little oasis of reason, usually the online views of respected commentators who you'll find in the weekly political press, on TV or on radio. But apart from those odd, honourable exceptions, I've found only a mirror image of the soapbox community, an arena stuffed with conspiracy theorists who are convinced that the Twin Towers were destroyed by a CIA plot to justify a war on Islam, witch hunters who are desperate to see John Venables unmasked and preferably lynched, anti-Semites who want Israel bombed out of existence, the deluded who say they have categorical evidence that the McCanns murdered their own child, or simply the weirdos who are certain that we've been invaded by Martians. Fantasists and fanaticists, conspiracy theorists and hate preachers who revel in the anonymity of an environment where they can ignore facts and be as aggressive, unpleasant and cruel as they want. In fact, in one crucial respect, online comment diverges even from Speaker's Corner as a genuine contributor to democracy. At least at Hyde Park, the assembled listeners were exposed to different arguments and opinions. For the online community, blogs act, and I used the same phrase as Caroline, act as an echo chamber, which simply reinforces the prejudices and the conspiracy theories of those who participate. You don't log on to Guido Fawkes or Labour list for political enlightenment. Now, should this lawless jungle be regulated? Of course it shouldn't. We're absolutely not arguing for some kind of Stasi-like body who monitors every blog entry and swoops on every malcontent who chooses to hold forth on their computer. That's just nonsense. Ranters, ravers and conspiracy theorists have as much right to express their views online as they do over a few pints of beer in the pub.
Hear, hear.
I don't want any kind of regulation, any kind of intervention beyond the law of the land. We are at one on this, but that's not what the motion is about. I'm arguing simply that this anarchic jungle is unrepresentative, insignificant, excludes large numbers of the population, is ignored by the vast majority, makes no contribution to the reporting or understanding of contemporary issues, and does not in any way encourage participation in the democratic process. It functions perfectly well as another incarnation of the long-standing right to free speech, but its contribution to the democratic process, which is what we're debating, is zero. And that's why I'm opposing the motion.
So there we have it. On the one hand, bigotry online has taken Speaker's Corners online. On the other, the opportunity for partisan vitriol does help the democratic process. So you have a clear choice today. You've got an hour of debate now, and then you're going to have to make up your minds. So it's your chance now to join the debate, to take on either side. And we've got a couple at the back. So if you would wait for the microphone, please identify yourself. Be brief if you can, within a minute. Otherwise, the gong will go. Thank you. The lady first.
Good morning. I'm Ian Grant. I'm Managing Director of Encyclopaedia Britannica, and I'm also a member of the Information Society Working Group, which is a part of the UK National Commission, UNESCO. It seems to me that the opposers of the motion have conflated two things and have used the word online to mean the blogosphere. I think your description of the blogosphere is perfectly reasonable, just as Hunal's description of it is also perfectly reasonable. But to me, the critical thing about online publishing is that brand is just as important online as it is in printed media and in television. Britannica lives in a Google, Wikipedia, Britannica world, and our brand stands for what our brand stands for. And in the same way, Guardian, Times, newspaper websites are also online publishing platforms. So I think what you were arguing against was taking, as Stephen said, taking Speaker's Corner seriously. But actually what you also said about Speaker's Corner was that it was entirely inconsequential as far as democratic politics is concerned. So my contention is that you've conflated two things in your argument, and that's obscured your principal point.
And the lady behind, let's take a couple of points.
Yeah, my name is Jodie Ginsberg. I'm the Bureau Chief for the UK and Ireland for Reuters news agency. Oh. One of the issues that I think perhaps has been ignored by all four speakers is the fact that we're not talking about unregulated political comment online in the UK. We're talking about it globally, and I think it's one thing to talk about the fact that it might not further the democratic process potentially in the UK, but in those countries where there is no free press or free media, I think, for example, of Iran, there has been enormous amounts of political comment that I would say have helped to further the democratic process, particularly to put pressure internationally on those countries to change their way that they behave towards both the press and towards their public more generally.
What's your solution?
What's my solution to lack of democracy, or what's my solution to...
what do you do about it?
Well,
do you have a response?
Well, my response would be that that is an essential part of furthering democracy in all countries, but particularly in countries where there is no genuine freedom of the press, so that those countries should have unregulated comment, because it's the only way that we can find out about what is going on the ground in those countries. So I'm all for a global environment where we are able to read as much comment and observation by as many people as possible. And to Caroline's point, I'd say that there is a difference between regulation and moderation and mediation. And I think one of the essential issues in a welter of information that we have to try and cope with internationally and globally is to actually have some means of navigating through that flood of information.
So you're for the motion. I mean, I think it's worth picking up. Stephen's point was that it's not that it should be more regulated, but that it doesn't help the democratic process, which is the motion of the day. I think we need to keep some opinions coming in, and we've got a couple from Twitter. We have Tim Gopsel is our monitor of the Twitter world. And Tim, what have you got?
Yes, William, we got a couple of good tweets. Her Horn says regulation is needed to curb comments by those who aim to disrupt political debate. And BBC College says Sonny Hundal, part of campaign to stop Rod Liddle becoming head of Indy, freedom or censorship?
Well, I can answer that.
Free speech.
Would anybody like to pick up? Stephen, go on.
I'd like to pick up the international point. That kind of confuses issues. I mean, it's one of these things where you don't want to start getting pedantic about the precise wording of the motion. Had the word international been in the motion, then I would have found it much more difficult to oppose. And I think your point is absolutely right. And I think there are many nations in the world which are authoritarian, autocratic, which don't have a long-standing tradition of free speech. Iran is the obvious example that comes to mind, where online political comment and some kind of idea of what was actually going on at the time was clearly helpful, and I think I would absolutely argue contributed or contributes to enhancing the democratic process in inherently non-democratic countries. But I do think that is a different issue. And I don't think that should be allowed to confuse. To me, this motion is clearly about the UK or about mature democracies. And I don't think we should allow the notion of what happens in other countries which clearly require more of a democratic culture to be instilled. I don't think we should allow that to colour the nature of this particular debate.
Have we got any more comments on this central point which Caroline and Bob also from different sides made central, which is that whether or not you think that the unregulated addition to the news sphere is good for the democratic process on. That's really where the divide is coming. And Caroline is saying it's absolutely fine to have that, but for God's sake, don't let's lose sight of the need to have a mature debate, the context and so on. And so Bob is saying exactly the opposite. From his long experience in this country and North America and the States, he's saying, no, let the people speak. So that seems to me to be the absolute heart of it. Please go ahead.
Yeah, if I could just come back on that, because actually one of the comments was implied that somehow the blogosphere was inconsequential. I mean, picking up Steve's word about Speaker's Corner. But actually, while Speaker's Corner, I think, was inconsequential, though an important sort of piece of British eccentricity, actually, I'm not so sure about the blogosphere. I think that and actually online more generally, I think that you can see this in the current election debate now. I think the pressure on journalism and on politicians to be constantly responding minute by minute to things because they're getting their Twitters, because they're getting things online, because they've got, let's be frank about it, the News 24 channels, 24-hour news channels. So it's a mixture of things. I would entirely accept that. But also the blogosphere, I think, starts setting the boundaries higher and higher and higher for sort of scandalous journalism, for overemphasizing points, to put it kindly. For just sticking stuff up there to see what happens. And that, I believe, has a bad impact on our journalism. I think it makes the tabloid end of our journalism feel that they've got to go a bit further. I think it makes it more and more difficult for our journalism to do the thing that really matters for an election, which is proper investigation of policy and of the implications of what the MPs are saying, yes, and the political parties are saying. So I don't think it is inconsequential.
Just let Bob come back quickly on that.
We've just heard from Big Sister.
Okay, we're going to go more or less clockwise because I saw a hand here, index first, and then at the back, and then near the front.
Hi there, Padraig Reedy, Index on Censorship. I just wonder, if we took the word online out of this motion, would we even think this argument would be worth having? Would anyone oppose?
Shall we just collect a couple more then? That's one point to keep on the back burner. Yes, please.
Thanks. Julian Petley, Chair of the Campaign for Press and Broadcasting Freedom. I wanted to come back to Caroline's point, really, which is like talking about how the blogosphere is, in a way, infecting other forms of journalism. I think it actually is. And one of the areas, I think, in which this happens is if you look at the bits of websites, reputable journalistic websites like the BBC and like The Guardian, where people have their replies and comments on the articles which we see. So on the one hand, on the BBC website and the Guardian website, you have extremely well thought out and reasoned journalism, and then in the comments you appear to get more and more and more of the language of the blogosphere. And my question to you, I think, would be, should perhaps there not be a bit more moderation of the readers' comments on reputable journalistic websites, because large numbers of people appear to be there simply to try to derail the debate. And I certainly would not argue that moderation is the same thing as censorship. It is simply exercising editorial judgment. I mean, newspapers don't print every single letter which every single person sent in green ink. Why print all comments?
You're voting against the motion, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
Fine, fine. Shall we just pick those two up quickly then, Karen? It's directly to you.
Yes, I think on the moderation point, interestingly, the BBC normal policy is nowadays not to moderate or to do moderate, but to do some post-moderation where we remove stuff that's obviously libelous or something, but to do it very minimally. During an election period, we do moderate the election sites because of, partly because of our statutory obligation to be impartial, and the other statutory broadcasters would do that as well. I think one of the things I think about this, though, because I notice, this is getting Bob really nicely wound up, so it's a good sort of argument, but is my point that I was saying that we need to make sure, you give a voice to the unopinionated as well as the opinionated, and the weak as well as the uncertain as well as the certain. And one of the problems with the blogosphere is it gives a voice to the certain, and it's used by them, and it's very easy for them to take it over in a way that can give a distorted impression of the general trend of opinion. Certainly that's why we moderate in an election. So as I repeat, I think it's online is not least for its global consequences, but just in general, a tremendous addition actually to democratic debate in many ways. But I don't think you can have it on its own. And I think I think it has some downsides as well as some upsides. And if you have it outside the context of a broader regulated media, I think it would be not good for democracy.
Isn't that also the answer to the earlier point, that the point about online comment is precisely that it is unregulated in both ways? I mean, sometimes it may stretch the law. Certainly, Julian's point, it's partisan and you would argue needs to be moderated. Let's have a response from this side to that, precisely that point, that there needs some kind of moderation of what appears online, more than we have now with the PCC, which has not intervened very much. I mean, the latest Spectator one was a rare occasion.
I'll respond, and actually, I'll just pick up the point about moderation. We actually do moderate on my blogs, which is that we try, the point there is that the blogosphere is for everyone, the internet is for everyone, but people are not allowed to come onto my blog specifically. I'm just speaking for Liberal Conspiracy, and just criticize other or say libelous things. They get deleted for that. And if they don't let a debate develop good, have a good debate, then they will get chucked out. So I think the problem here is that my opponents are caricaturing blogs a lot. Actually, there are lots of blogs which spend a lot of time looking at policy. For example, the other day we published a long 2,000-word piece by Tom Watson MP explaining why he'd argued, voted against the bill on restricting libel law costs, and that got a massive response online. We've published lots of other pieces. We constantly publish pieces about national insurance, about housing policy, what governments are doing, looking at specific parts of the bill. And not to blow my own trumpet, but this is a very popular blog. So, just to say that some raving lunatic who has 5 readers is representative of the blogosphere is completely, naive, I think. Most of the top blogs don't spend all their time libeling other people. They spend a lot of time looking at policy. They spend a lot of time looking at what's going on in Westminster, and they all want to improve our democracy. So you have to look at where the people are going, what people are reading.
But they're all read by the other bloggers.
So no, they're not necessarily.
It becomes a conversation, right?
That's completely not. That's not the truth. That's not the case. You have almost like a pyramid when it comes to blogs. There's a few blogs, there's about 10, 15 blogs, which get most of the readers, and then you have a lot of other blogs which get a few readers, and some of which are really good. But the point is, you look at the top blogs, and none of them are like how you're describing them. So you really have to try and be representative. I just need to pick up on a few other points. There's a point made about Iran and the US. It's a good point, but you can argue actually that the people who were tweeting about the Iranian elections were even more unrepresentative than a lot of people in the UK, because a lot of them were middle class, a lot of them were, and access to technology in Iran is actually much more limited than the UK. So I'm not actually arguing against that. So I'm just saying that if you're taking representativeness as an example, then Iran is not necessarily the best example. But the best blogging country for me actually is the US. And we have, my opponent said that for mature democracies it doesn't work. It's completely untrue when it comes to the US. They have massive blogs over there, including the Huffington Post, which is a blog, which spend a lot of money on good journalism. They broke a lot of stories. Talking Points, the Memo, another fantastic blog. Drudge Report breaks a lot of stories. lots of, even the hated little green footballs broke a few stories which challenged journalism, which actually exposed some of the mistakes that journalists had made. So all I'm trying to say is that in the US, they spend a lot of time and money investing on their own blogs. They pay people. They have to look at the law. They spend a lot of time campaigning, raising funds for candidates, trying to improve their own democracies, trying to improve their own parties. And that has a huge impact on political participation. And you can't just argue that it is all irrelevant.
I'd like to bring in the issue of exactly what is on the online, particularly the video territory, in just a moment. But we have a couple of urgent hands here. The man at the back, and then here. We keep going clockwise, please.
Donncha Dillon, and I'm Vice President of the NUJ. I think one of the problems so far in this debate is we haven't really looked at all the different options for regulation. At the very beginning, we were presented with basically two options, which is law, law and the PCC. And I think we can all agree that in general, the PCC is incredibly ineffectual. And the option of having an independent form of regulation, where the public has a say in it, where the public is involved, is a fantastic idea, and the NUJ supports that. In Ireland, for example, the Irish version of the PCC has been moving towards that model. Now, to look at that and to try and develop that, and to include the online sphere in that, as a voluntary system where people can sign up to it. Because I absolutely agree with all of Sonny's points. There are some fantastic things happening online. There's some great journalism online, which in many ways gets lost in the mess. If there was a voluntary system of regulation online that people could sign up to, that would allow people to, to answer back effectively. I've seen examples on blogs, for example, where somebody's posted something that's incorrect. When they're challenged on that, they go, actually, it's your job to correct me in the comments. It's not my job to correct my mistake. Well, actually, a commitment to accuracy is a basic fundamental journalistic principle. People signing up to that, people signing up not to be prejudiced, to change their content, to sign up to a code of conduct and to have effective regulation on that can be accessed by the public very easily, so that it's not imposed by law, it's not imposed by government, and it's not imposed by unregulated bodies, is actually a very, very positive thing. And that's the kind of regulation that would actually, I think, improve the democratic process.
So that means that you will have to vote against the motion, as stated. That's
No, it does not.
That's the point. It is not the point. Well, you can come back on that. No, let's have one more. Well, no, I think he said it had to be regulated, even if it's self-regulated. It's a new form of regulation, I think is what he's saying. So he just said he would vote against the motion. Please.
Hi, my name is Michael Mineshi. I'm a political journalist with Iraq Interests. I'd like to commend the chair speaker for mentioning death of journalists. Some of them, they were colleagues of mine, actually, in Iraq, in the line of their duties as well. But going back to the issue of why should be less regulation than more regulations, because I'm for the motion, for the reason is, are we in effect undermining the readers themselves, the intelligence of our readers? I believe that the Iraq war in itself showed here in the UK how more than 1 million people came out in support of not getting involved in that war. People from all walks of life, who they were not necessarily a bloggers, not necessarily a journalist, but they felt that there was something wrong. That's in its way, it demonstrates the political awareness of the people in the UK. And I think that's my genuine belief, that I believe that when they put ethnicity in application form, they should add to it a humanitarian, because I think there is a lot of people, if it's not in this room, but anywhere else, who will, of course, take that point, forward when it comes.
So you think regulation of political comment is denying the will of the people, is getting in the way? Is that what you're saying?
No, not at all. Actually, I believe very strongly that we should have more political comments. I think the public are entitled to make up their own mind. There's a lot of intelligent people out there. You can find intelligence in a completely different arena and walks of life.
So you're for the motion.
I'm
unregulated comment is good for democracy. A quick one. Yes, Tim.
Padraig Riley says, unregulated political comment online helps the democratic process. Take out online and the proposition is silly. And Paul Bradshaw says, give a voice to the unopinionated, says Caroline Thompson. So what would they say then?
I think you have to log on to an awful lot of blogs to find out. Stephen, you wanted to answer that point there, I think.
It's not so much the unopinionated. I think it's those who don't have the loud hailers to shout above everybody else. I wanted to take up a couple of points. First of all, I think there's a distinction to be drawn between journalism and comment. There are some very good online journalism sites. Huffington Post is one. Drudge Report I have a problem with, actually. Someone did an analysis of Drudge Report. For every one story that had 1 or 2 grains of truth, there was something like 20 which were either fictitious or grossly exaggerated. So I think we have to be a little bit careful about that.
Sounds like some of our newspapers.
Yeah, I was just going to say absolutely right. And personally, I have no problem with that, and I wouldn't regulate them. Do they help the democratic process? No, I'm afraid they don't. And I do think that we need to be careful about making that distinction. We're not saying that online comment ought to be regulated. I think this is absolutely crucial. Now, there are certain types of regulation, voluntary self-regulation is one of them, which might actually help to enhance the democratic process by, for example, voluntarily kite marking certain kind of websites, which says, like the BBC, this is the code of conduct that we aspire to. You can hold us to account for whether or not we achieve that, we actually abide by that code of conduct. That's not compulsory. They can choose to do that. But that is different from what the motion is saying. That is simply adding another layer to existing online political comment. And the issue is, if you have this sort of unregulated morass of comment, does it actually contribute to the democratic process? And I see no evidence that it does.
I think Christopher Mayer, before he left the PCC, came up with, I think he actually argued for that in a BBC programme. There should be some kite marking, some measure, which is a form of regulation. As a matter of fact.
Well, it is a form of regulation, and it could be on top of, not instead of, the unregulated environment we have at the moment.
Any comments from this side?
I'm not sure if what my opponent is arguing for is regulation, or just saying that in general anything online will not help the democratic process, because we had a massive debate about this actually when the PCC a few months ago said that this is in December only last year. They said they were looking potentially to regulate blogs, and one of my bloggers put up a post saying that the PCC is so ineffectual that in fact bloggers have much higher standards of have much higher standards of responding to mistakes, correcting themselves, and trying to respond to what people are saying, because especially remember this, the comments are much more prominent in blogs than in newspapers. So in a newspaper you can have a completely idiotic headline, a completely misrepresented story, and you have 3 or 4 comments which get shown, which can be completely slating the article, has no impact whatsoever. But on blogs, it's not true at all. I mean, only last week we published a story about Vince Cable allegedly saying something in a debate, and then a lot of people actually went back to the debate on BBC iPlayer, transcribed what he said, and said this is untrue, and we had to change our story because so many people were saying that. And so my point is that it's not the case that political bloggers are completely unregulated. Sorry, don't change their behavior. And it's not the case that a regulation by the PCC is going to make things better, because in fact, if you do have regulation by the PCC on blogs, I think most of the time it's going to not make an ounce of difference. We're already covered by libel law. It's simply not true that you can libel whoever you want and get away with it. If you had money, people would sue you. If you had, if you were libeling someone. So I just think that this whole self-regulation thing is a false dichotomy. If we were regulated by the PCC tomorrow, it wouldn't make any difference.
I just wanted to take you up because I think there's a difference of opinion on your side about regulation in relationship to libel law. Because, I mean, I think if your only redress, I'm with Bob on this, if your only redress is to sue someone for libel, that's not much of a redress. And that is one of the problems with an unregulated internet.
I didn't say that. I said we do change stories if we get them wrong.
Yeah, you do, but that's because you're running a sort of, a good site.
Not
everyone does, and they're not
Well, the Daily Mail doesn't print corrections on its newspapers, whereas the Guardian does. Should we shut the Daily Mail down, or do we think that it adds nothing to?
But we
British
don't.
debate?
We're not arguing the Daily Mail's a great contributor to British democracy, are we?
I would actually say
we can all agree on
I would actually
And you're
say
certainly
that
not.
it is important for a democracy to have someone like the Daily Mail making the points they need to. And actually, I hate the Daily Mail passionately, but that doesn't mean that I would tomorrow say that
So you
it
wouldn't
should
hold
not be
it
around.
as a standard of what you should be achieving in your online.
That's true, but that's the whole point of having lots of different opinions.
I think the subtle thing about this motion is that it's not for or against regulation as such. It is about whether unregulated helps the democratic process. So we've got to focus on, actually, that will be in half an hour what you're going to actually vote on. Do you think we could, I know there are hands up, but do you think I could call on our two specialist experts who are in the audience, and perhaps Nick Jones first, because this idea that unregulated newspaper websites or whatever they are would become rivals to television with attack journalism, partisan journalism and so on, has not developed in the way that many people expected. I think you've mentioned 18 Doughty Street on the Conservative side in the past. The examples that we've seen from the little slideshow and earlier, I think leave a question in people's minds about what the real impact, how much this is actually changing the flow of information into the debate from a partisan direction. What do you say about that, Nick?
I think what we need to remember I think what we need to remember is, and we looked at that video, was that we saw how the newspapers, the Murdoch Press, the Mail Group, how they can now command the online agenda, and how that can also change what's happening on radio and television. They are literally, in my opinion, the newspapers, they're succeeding in driving a coach and horses through our established broadcasting standards through their invasion online. Now, we've been well served by a free press in this country. We've been well served by the development of the blogosphere. I'm not in any way seeking to restrict the blogosphere. What I'm trying to draw attention to is the way in which newspaper proprietors can command the online agenda, and the way that that can affect politics. And we've heard the people say, well, why not take the word online out? But look, what we've got to understand is that our traditions, our political democratic traditions, are being smashed up. If you listened to Sun talk online on European election day, they were saying vote Conservative. And what happened, of course, with Sunline, it's now just won an award. John Gaunt, the presenter's up for a Sonny. He is rewriting the rules of broadcasting journalism. They were celebrating the fact online that they are the online radio where you can talk politics while people are voting. What do you think is going to happen, everybody, on polling day, on May the 6th? You switch on to the online world of the newspapers, and you will see a very clear political agenda. So, in my opinion, they are managing to drive a coach and horses through our traditions. We saw there that video of Prince Harry. Now, I worked for the BBC for 30 years. If somebody had tried to sell me a pinched video of Prince Harry and get it on the BBC, I would have been out of the door. We would never have got it on the air. But once it's on the News of the World's website, it's in the public interest. So the BBC and the rest of the broadcasters tear up their rule books, roll over, and will use purloined material in a way which I think is damaging our democratic process. So, and we can't but not understand that the online world now has hidden persuaders which we know nothing about. The government is spending £500,000 altering the Google search engines to throw up government schemes. The Conservatives have just piled in. They're spending a bomb of money on Google to alter the way in which the online world is working. So I'm saying very briefly that we should have and think about some sort of regulation. Are we saying that on polling day, on May the 6th, that the online world should be a complete free-for-all when it comes to political comment? Aren't we saying that we're Europeans, that we have traditions, that when polling stations are open, you don't have media proprietors manipulating the agenda to their advantage? So I would say we need the thought, at least, to be there, that if we're going to have an online world with convergence, where these online radio and television stations will soon be available digitally on our radio and television stations, they will be in full competition with the BBC, and I make this prediction now, they will bring to Britain politicised radio and television via the online world, and the whole of the country will roll over. And if you look at the Conservatives, you won't find it in the manifesto, I expect, but it's there. They are promising that newspaper websites should have complete freedom to push their impartial news through the online world into the digital world. And I say we've just got to think that there are some powerful forces who are quite capable of manipulating the online world, and however much I would like to and would defend to the hilt what a blog sphere does and the blogs do, please remember that there are some people with pretty powerful checkbooks around who can manipulate our agenda. Thank you very much.
Nick, would you therefore regulate online TV-like video services to save democracy?
Well, I would certainly say that on the online audio-visual world, that on polling day, you should not be allowed to have, as the Sun says it now has, and it can offer political comment and opinion when the polling stations are open. I mean, we have to have some standards, and that's why I say that we have to understand what's happening by the back door. The online world has given the media proprietors a new lease of life, and we don't know where it's going.
But I think you're contradicting yourself, because in fact, the online world offers such low barriers to entry that that's the only sphere right now where someone can challenge the Times, can challenge Rupert Murdoch, and challenge Paul Dacre.
Yes, of course, but the online chatter of the blogosphere is being influenced by the big bucks of the media proprietors. That all of the stories.
So where's the evidence for that?
Well, let's look at the biggest story of all. The biggest story was the Daily Telegraph spending £100,000 buying a purloined disc of information. Could the BBC have got that story online? Of course it couldn't. A newspaper could. Look at Lord Levy, bought up by the Daily Mail. Look at the videos that are bought up by the newspaper proprietors, and they get them out online and they command the agenda. And all I'm saying is that it's an unregulated world which is demolishing our broadcasting standards.
Nick makes interesting points. I'd like to get both sides to comment. But was there one more comment on this from the floor? No. Would either side like... Please. WikiLeaks? Absolutely. You're saying that is good for democracy? And Nick, you wouldn't argue that the Telegraph should not have made its revelations?
Not at all. All I'm saying is that if that then flows over into... Our point is the political debate in this country. Are we accepting that the newspapers of this country, which are now largely pro-conservative, that argument is now going to be heard online and it's going to be picked up in the audiovisual world? And I'm just saying we have to think about it.
One more point from the back, the man in the back row.
Give Jamie a chance, will you?
Second.
Give Jamie a chance.
My name's
He had his hand up.
David Wardrop of the United Nations Association, and I was a campaigner for getting Britain back into membership of UNESCO. The point that's just been raised is relevant to what I'm saying, because I have a feeling one should drag ourselves out for a moment from this cottage industry of politics and journalism into, say, a real world like medicine, where they've had exactly this particular point. Bob Worcester talks about the prism through which articles in the Guardian, for instance, have to travel. And in the field of medicine, the Lancet, the BMJ, and others have, through peer review, ensured that the politics of medicine have been controlled by the few, as Peter has just been saying. And so the introduction of the internet, and therefore, one example, the super course, where professors from Harvard can have their lectures read tomorrow in Tanzania, in China, in Australia, and are inviting comment, has advanced that democratic process in the field of medicine that you people in journalism politics are in the foothills about. You are so far behind, it's not true. And therefore, it would be perhaps quite a good idea, notwithstanding Stephen's point, that some of us lack the critical literacy, Richard Hoggett's statement, the critical literacy to judge the dross from the reality. In the medical world, they are advanced there, and it has now brought in a new, albeit disciplined, blogosphere, which there isn't in politics, but who knows, you might reach it one day. I read another paper but The Guardian.
I think. Right.
Did you want to say?
Well, I think that's that's fine within the profession. So he's absolutely right. I mean, I'm looking forward to the day when my lectures go online and I'm criticised from all over the world. That's absolutely great. But that's different from the point about political participation is that it's supposed to be inclusive, not exclusive. That you want as many people involved in the democratic process as possible. And my problem, coming back to Sunny's point, is that you can have lots of wonderful blogs, people spending all number of hours trying really hard to find things out to make a difference. In the end, they're really only read by the same political activists who read the weekly political press and the political commentators online in the newspapers and watch it on TV. That's not an inclusive process, and therefore it's not part of the democratic process. And I do think it's different from a professional world. I come back to the point I made before. We must make a distinction between professional journalism, people who make it their jobs, it is their paid job, to go out, find facts, hold power to account. And that is their everyday life.
Does that include the Daily Mail?
If you're a journalist and you work for the Daily Mail, the PCC may not enforce the code of conduct, but there is a code of conduct with 11, 12 clearly stated rules by which you as a journalist are supposed to abide. It is there, it is in black and white. The PCC may choose not to implement it most of the time, but they did choose to do it for the Spectator, which is interesting. But we're not talking, I mean, that bit of the online world, which is, if you like, the online publication of established brand names, as the first speaker talked about, is actually rather different from the kind of unregulated world that I think you two are talking about. And hang on, just let me finish the one point. Those actually are regulated, just like the BBC is regulated. The online version of the BBC is regulated the same as the TV and radio versions. The online version of the Spectator, the Guardian, the Mail is regulated in the same way. What isn't regulated in the same way, as Nick was saying, is Sun Radio. That's a slightly awkward thing. Well, there you're simply talking about the organisation that is supposed to regulate journalism being completely ineffectual. I think again that is different from the notion of unregulated political comment.
No, but it's not, because the point you're trying to make is that the people who are paid to write journalism are somehow better or furthering the democratic process because they're regulated. That's completely untrue. That's what I've been trying to say all day.
Because they're abiding by, in theory, a set of
Can I just read? You'll see in your printed packs there is just a section on the Ofcom code as well as the BBC guidelines, and the key paragraph is Ofcom code for elections, obviously regulating what can be presented and said. These cover all licensed commercial broadcasters, TV and radio, including Sky. They don't cover audiovisual material on newspaper websites, which are self-regulated by the PCC, nor on standalone sites, which are unregulated.
But Ian, sorry, just to make one point, I want you to, for a second, forget the code, because that puts a dichotomy between people who are regulated and unregulated. What I want you to think about is the democratic process. When you're voting, think about the phrase democratic process, because the implication here is that the BBC will tell you what furthers the democratic process and what doesn't. What I'm trying to say to you is that do not let the gatekeepers define that process and say, well, this is good because this furthers the democratic process. You are bad because you don't further the democratic process as how we see it. No one has yet defined how we measure the point about democratic process. All those people who have been tweeting, we love the NHS because my mother got saved or my father's hip got replaced for no cost. Are those people not helping? Are they not engaging in the democratic process by tweeting something that they feel passionately about? Of course they are. Are those people who are going online to say they don't want Rod Liddle to become the editor of The Independent? Are they not engaging in the democratic process? Of course they are. The point I'm trying to say is that they are putting a false dichotomy between what is regulated and what isn't. That's completely not the case.
Well, how is that?
What we're talking about here is
that. How is that furthering the democratic process any more
Well,
than
how
me
do you
going down the
define
pub?
what is furthering
I'll
and what
buy you a
isn't?
drink at lunchtime, and you and I can have a chat with a lot of other people. We'll all shout at each other and have a good slanging match. Is that furthering the democratic process?
What is furthering the democratic process?
Well,
Tell
it's
me.
not having a chat.
No, tell me, what is furthering the democratic process?
Inclusiveness, information,
Our Parliament is not inclusive.
participation.
Our Parliament is not inclusive at all.
Understanding.
This is very good. You disagree. Let's have a couple more from the front first, and then Harry, please.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Jamie Hervé, and I'm a master's student as...
Stand up.
Sorry? Oh.
Up to the audience.
I'll stand to the side. My name is Jamie Hervé. I'm a master's student of media and communications at the LSE. And on this question of inclusiveness, I do have a question for the opponents of the motion. And that is whether regulating political comment does not undermine the very benefit that the internet provides to democracy in terms of its role as a great equalizer. I do believe that it's a gross exaggeration to suggest that it instills a sense of democracy, but at the same time, it provides a platform through which a concerned citizenry may voice their dissent. And it is true that that dissent may be ugly, uninformed, or even highly partisan. But are these reasonable grounds for which to stifle that voice? And I think what it boils down to is this question of accountability that Caroline mentioned at the beginning, about the trust level of the BBC. And on the same measure, I would agree with Stephen that the internet is absolutely rife with uninformed, half-truths, and unreliable opinions. At the same time, for all the millions of blogs that exist out there, how many actually generate a large readership and make their way into the public sphere? And I think that's really the value of them, in that the most informed and the most credible tend to raise in popularity. So I think that although we have these half-truths out there in the internet, how do people value those opinions compared to those of the BBC or The Guardian? And I think that's really the question at hand. Thank you.
You're going to vote for the motion?
Unabashedly, yes.
There you go. There you go. I do want to have the position of the BBC on these points. Yes, Caroline.
I think it's on your central point. We're not arguing for regulation of the political comment on the internet, and indeed, I think the points made about the low barriers to entry are really interesting and are good and are one of the real pluses of the internet, as I was saying. But the difficulty is if you get that on its own without the regulated content. And because what I don't believe is that in general adds to the level of understanding. And although, and I think understanding is key to making a democracy function properly. Actually, I don't think a democracy functions properly in the way that is being described by the proponents, or tending to be described, they perhaps don't mean to, by a sort of series of referenda. By a series of, do we support the NHS? Oh, well, the internet says, more people do than don't, so we do it. If you also ask them, are you happy to pay the increased taxes? Then you might get a different answer. If you ask them, are you in favour of hanging terrorists? You might get a different answer. That's not the way our democracy works. Our democracy works by electing representatives who then take decisions. And I mean, you can work a democracy by a series of referenda, but it's, as I say, it's not the way we've chosen to do it through Parliament. And then just the final point I wanted to make was to pick up, in a sense, it was the point that Nick was making. I'm not actually entirely with Nick in that I don't think you can do regulation of the internet, though I think some of the models of voluntary regulation that were being discussed by my colleague back here are rather interesting from that point of view, and might be possible. But I think the point you're making, Nick, which is a very strong one, is about the importance of brand, and that the very ubiquitousness of the internet, the very extent of the comment and the range of stuff that's available, means that it shouldn't blind us to the fact that actually brand pulls through. And you can see that actually with the success of the BBC site. The BBC is a content site doing fantastically well compared to anyone else, partly because of the BBC brand and it's being a trusted brand. You can see that with the Mail and the Sun. So I don't think, although the barriers to entry are low, and it's better than newspapers because it does offer more people entry, that doesn't mean that it is necessarily going to end up being a fantastically democratic process. And look at how, as you were saying, people pay to get their sites top of the Google search.
Will your view change if and when convergence really is complete and some of these websites with video become effectively TV channels and the distinction between your computer screen and a TV screen is gone? Then surely Nick's point comes into play, doesn't it? Then you effectively have rival TV channels which are entirely unregulated and politically partisan. Do you take that point?
I think what the Conservatives' proposal is, that in a digital world that we should have that freedom.
Well, what do you say to that?
Well, I think that actually I hadn't registered the issues around how the Ofcom code applies to newspapers online. In other words, that it doesn't apply to newspapers video online, which I think is an interesting confusion in regulation, which I hadn't registered. I think what I'm essentially arguing for is that there is a role for unregulated content, but there is in parallel with that a role for regulation and regulated public intervention, regulated content of the sort that the BBC provides and ITV and Channel 4 have traditionally provided in Britain, because in the end that can stand back a bit from the fray, can give context, can give understanding, and can help. And the two working together have this sort of symbiotic relationship, which I believe means that we will have a better functioning democracy than if we simply had unregulated on their own.
But I'm not sure if we're disagreeing with that. I mean, who said that we should get rid of papers? I never said that.
I didn't say that.
We've got about 10 minutes and quite a lot to pack in. A quick tweet from the tweet corner, Tim.
Yes, I've got a few here. Adersi says, save democracy through more government regulation. How does this fit with comments about international press freedoms, such as with China? And Padraig Reedy has got a couple. By the way, there are at least 5 people tweeting in the room here. Some of whom have spoken.
Quickly, Tim.
Yeah, well, a couple of comments from him. Firstly, dear everyone who's ever worked at the BBC, you do not own journalism or democracy. And he also says, if losing a debate in front of a liberal audience, slag off the Daily Mail.
For the motion. I'll take Jodie again in a second, but Harry, please, you had your hand up.
Harry Reeves, UK National Commission for UNESCO. Sonny and Stephen have both tried very manfully to move the discussion to the second line of the motion. We've talked a lot about unregulated political comment online and not enough perhaps about what we mean by helping the democratic process, and I do think that needs to be addressed. Two of the things that I think we might look to for help for the democratic process is, first of all, to increase the transparency and accountability of our political masters. And secondly, and this is a point that Hannah made in her winning article in the student journalism competition, addressing the progressive disengagement of people with the democratic process. I'm sure Sir Robert could tell us the turnout figures for the last few elections. I can't, but it doesn't tell a good story. I came in the room thinking I knew which way I would vote on this motion. I'm now not so sure. And I think the point that Stephen has raised a couple of times now about whether the blogosphere, that online discussion, actually has any impact outside of its own little universe, or quite big universe, is relevant here. I'm just wondering, to help me reach a conclusion on which way I should vote, whether unregulated political comment is making an impact on those two issues of transparency and accountability and engagement of the public with the political process.
Can I help him on that particular
participation? Let's have a quick one, Steve, yes.
Well, there's been a huge amount of research done at Goldsmiths College, funded by Leverhulme, on this whole area of online and traditional news media. There is no evidence whatsoever, as Sunny was talking about evidence from the States, I don't know about the States, there is no evidence whatsoever that online participation or comment has actually assisted participation in the democratic process in terms of adding to a greater understanding of issues or actually taking part in the electoral process. So in this country, the evidence suggests it hasn't had an impact.
The Obama campaign?
And the fact
Bob, do you want
that
to just come back
there
on
are
that?
people twittering in this room while taking part in the debate only adds to my sense of the echo chamber.
The Obama campaign and participation?
There is no evidence that in the United States, so far as I know, and I followed it closely and spent 5.5 hours on ITV with Alistair Stewart of the night of the American election, that the internet changed people's voting behavior. Now, it may have happened, but I say there's no evidence that I've seen. However, I have seen the evidence, both in the flow of money and the flow of volunteers that came out of the internet that Obama used in that election campaign. Now, this did help the democratic process, and to a large degree, it took power back to the people. In the most marginal state, the state of Missouri, where I was actually born, was the key battleground state. It was the marginal, the most marginal. Obama was able to fund and staff 84 local offices in the state of Missouri. McCain had 14. Now, that certainly would have made a difference to what turned out to be not quite so close as we expected, an election, but however, did help to increase power to the people and putting democracy on the ground.
Can I just jump in
quickly?
I worked on the Obama campaign, and I went out there and I found the information entirely via the web. We found out where the offices were, who was, and when we got there, where did the calls need to be made, where was the information about what to do with the campaign. Anytime people called in and said, we want to know this about what the Obama campaign stands for, we went online and looked at what his page said about gun control, about abortion, whatever, and then we read it to them, or people checked it out online. On the day of the election, you could go online and find out exactly where your local polling station was online, and all this kind of information. You would not believe how good the campaign was on harnessing the internet to drive people out to vote, as well as to get them to talk to each other, and then go out to their local constituencies and get people involved.
No, I'm sorry, this is functional. This is the internet as a functional, instrumental process. It is not political comment.
We've got one first-time speaker in the middle, and then we'll take Jody from Reuters at the back again, please.
Just two quick points. There's one form of regulation which has not been mentioned, and that is having to pay for...
Colin. Just
Colin
identify.
There's one form of regulation that hasn't been mentioned, and that's paying for sites, which I suggest to you that if this increases, that you have to pay subscriptions to the sites, will actually limit the democratic process rather than expand it. And that is, in fact, a form of regulation. The other quick point I wanted to make was to the medical contribution about peer review, which seems to me did not work all that well when it came to autism and the vaccination progress. So I'm not sure that they necessarily can attack journalists from their own point of view.
Which way are you voting, Colin?
I haven't yet decided.
Aha! So everything to play for. About 5 minutes more of general comments, then we'll have a quick wrap from each of the speakers and the vote. Jody Ginsburg, Reuters at the back.
Thank you. It strikes me that what we're talking about here is informed choice when we're talking about helping and furthering the democratic process. And I agree with Nick that the potential for financially powerful media magnates to skew informed choice by throwing an enormous amount of money at their publications to encourage you to think in a certain way has the potential to skew that. But what I'm not clear about is whether or not that makes a difference, whether it's online or whether it's in a newspaper format. So he talks about the example of The Sun. Is there a difference, and I'm asking this as a question, it's not a statement, is there a difference between Sun Talk and Sun Online being able to peddle its views about the political process as against the Sun newspaper being able to say the day before the 92 election, last person to leave the country, please switch out the lights.
It was
and
the
then
day of the election.
the day of the election, and then claim that it actually influenced people sufficiently to have won the election. And that's where I find this difficult, is I'm not clear that there is actually a huge difference between exercising your power as a media mogul online versus being able to do it in a newspaper or a broadcasting environment.
Right, getting into the nitty-gritty. Please, Paul. Paul Bradshaw.
Yeah, I was just going to, I think
Well done.
Given a lot of the flack that's being thrown to this anonymous mass of commenters for uninformed comment and comment without evidence, I thought I would pick up a couple of factual inaccuracies in some of the statements that are being made. Nick mentioned about the government altering search engines. What the government are actually doing is paying for advertising on search engines just as they pay for advertising on clearly marked advertising in newspapers. Also, they spend money making their websites easier to find in the same way they spend money on road signs to show you to your nearest job centre. So I think it's worth investigating that a bit further. Stephen makes a lot of unsupported assertions about how people visit blogs and the types of people that visit blogs. As a blogger myself, I write the online journalism blog. I can say that the vast majority of traffic to that site comes from search engines. So those are not regular visitors. Those are people who are searching for something specific. It might be the digital economy bill, but it might be the libel law, it might be something else. And the evidence for blog traffic generally suggests that that's a common pattern, that you get about a third from search engines, a third regular visitors, and a third who kind of come through social networks. We seem to have moved past the kind of regulation issue, so I don't want to tackle that. I think we all seem to agree that we don't want to necessarily regulate comment, perhaps, but it's this idea that political comment online helps the democratic process at all. What strikes me is that we don't seem to trust people very much. A couple of issues. Caroline, you talk about unmediated content from the government, for example, and yet you're talking about mediating the discussion the other way from citizens and kind of deciding what is worthy of going in the other direction. There's this talk of people having an understanding, and there's this assumption that one day a person is a normal citizen. They don't have that understanding. They need a newspaper or a journalist to tell them that. The next day they get a job as a journalist, and suddenly, overnight, they have grown this understanding, and they're able to tell us all the context and the analysis of what we are seeing in a democratic process. So, an important point to make is that regulation does exist online, and that's the regulation of our peers. It's the regulation of the comments. It's the regulation of the links that we give to each other, and the content that is seen as unique and trustworthy and valuable and insightful gets linked to. It gets passed around. It gets trust, and people build a reputation. So, that link economy is the regulation of the internet. And I want to kind of finish off with actually taking this question, this hypothesis, and actually looking, well, is there any evidence to support this hypothesis? And clearly there are. We've already mentioned the I Love the NHS series of Twitter messages. Now, that was all about people exchanging stories. It was about people finding out that there was a health bill going through in America as it happened. But how many people would have heard of that bill if it wasn't for that campaign? It wasn't necessarily covered in the press that a lot of people will have been reading, in the tabloid press, for example. More recently, the digital economy bill. The coverage of that bill and the political process around it, the wash-up, the whips, all of that has been minimal in the mainstream press. And the amount of information that people like me have got through Twitter and online comments, message boards and so on, has been phenomenal. My understanding personally of the democratic process has been phenomenally expanded by this particular instance. And I don't think it's the case that there is a mass of unopinionated people. People have opinions about some things and not about others. With the digital economy bill, that tapped into something that a lot of people had an opinion about. And because they had an opinion about it, they found out about the democratic process, and they didn't like what they saw. They didn't like the front bench stitch-up. So the fact that a third of people are not online, and that statistic's old, it's changed, doesn't necessarily mean that we should devalue the opinions of everyone else. A third of people might not vote. It doesn't mean that we don't value the votes of everyone else.
A clear voice for the motion there. Paul Bradshaw should have said teaches online journalism at Birmingham City University. I wonder, Hannah Marshall, if we could coax you into saying which side of the argument you're on, the winner of the student journalism competition, and then I think we'll have time for a quick, we'll have one more and then a quick wrap from the speakers.
Well, I did come in thinking, as you mentioned, that I knew which side of the debate I was on, and I'm now hanging in the balance because I've kind of come around to the idea of the internet being something that I hadn't properly registered was the difference between the internet being a mode for getting information. I was thinking of the Transfigurer affair and the super injunctions and how mainstream media had not been allowed to broadcast that because of legal limitations. But it's true that that's not exactly political comment online being good for the democratic process. It's more the internet as a tool for finding out information. But what I have been wondering, and found myself wondering more and more actually throughout the debate, was what is the power of the media generally? I know that a lot of people that I've spoken to, a lot of course mates, people at university, seem to be very cut off from the media generally. It's something that I was quite surprised about, especially studying journalism and media, to find that a lot of people don't watch the news, don't read the newspapers, and do get their information online. But also that a lot of people and that I've spoken to mentioned the point about blogs, for example, being regulated by trust and by their readers. And Ian Dale, for example, who I spoke to for my article, was quite adamant about that point. He said that if you lose the trust of your readers, then your readers are gone. And so in that case, it's automatically self-regulating.
Hannah's one of quite a few floating voters in the room, so the wrap-ups in a minute are going to be very important. And the final comment there, please.
I'm Firdevs Robinson, BBC World Service. I share a lot of reservations about blogosphere and internet causing difficulties for democratic process, especially when it comes to hate speech and radicalism and other issues. But I think that aside, we need to mention the role of social media in helping democratic process. I think when it comes to social media, I differ, and I change my mind about influence of internet. Because I think social media was extremely helpful in the United States when Obama campaign happened the way it did. And here it's untested ground. I think it may turn out to be very helpful in Britain, especially reaching the young people who are not engaged in politics and people who are not traditional, ordinary political animals that read newspapers and watch television, would get their information and get their lobbying and get their exchange of opinions on social media much better than any other way that I can think of.
So you're for the motion?
Yes, I will be.
For the motion, okay. We're going to call a halt there to the general comments. We're going to hear up to 2 minutes from each of the speakers. If you can make it quicker, so much the better, because we're up against time. And we'll go in reverse order. So we'll have the second opposer, the second proposer, and then Caroline and Bob Worcester to finish. So if you'd like to add your final thoughts, Stephen, within a minute or two.
Okay, where to start? I just want to pick up a couple of points from Paul. The third figure is not out of date at all. It's from Ofcom's latest market reports, and I think one of the essential features of the democratic process is that it is inclusive. That you are not disadvantaged or disenfranchised by being elderly, by not having a computer, by not having broadband, by not having the inclination or the interest. The figures that I have seen, and I'll need to go back to the source to check, for people, the proportion of people who actually are sufficiently interested to read or participate in online blogging is something in the very low single-figure percentages, 3 or 4% maybe.
Correct.
And that, to me, is not, thank you. Sir Robert's got much better hand on the figures than I do. That, to me, is not an indicator of something which enhances the democratic process. Yes, of course, it's a platform for dissent. So is the local pub, so is the soapbox, so is just going out in the street and having a rant. There's nothing wrong with having your say in any environment that you want. That is not what we're talking about. We are talking about something that actually makes a positive contribution to the democratic process. I'll make one last point, which is that a lot of what we've been talking about features those who are already politically active, or politically interested. Those who are politically interested, whether it be in the digital economy bill or what's going to happen in the next election or what happened in America, will always find a way of getting the information they need. If I didn't have Media Guardian to look at the digital economy bill, I would go and read the debates online in Hansard, or I would talk to someone who'd been there, or I'd go there myself. That is, again, not what we're talking about. We're talking about an opportunity for people who are not necessarily sufficiently interested to make it their business to find out about things. Last point. We've heard a lot of idealistic vision of 1,000 flowers blooming. That was actually the democratic vision of the internet at the beginning. Let 1,000 flowers bloom. That is not what is happening. I go part of the way with Nick about the online presence of the big media organizations. They are extremely dominant. They do set the agenda. And however many very fine little blogging sites there might be, like Sun is, I'm afraid their impact on the total democratic process is that.
Sonny Handel, if you keep it quite brief, please.
Sure. I understand that a lot of you have reservations about blogs because there is a lot of journalists out there who spend a lot of time just slagging off blogs, probably because they've been slagged off on a blog for saying something unsubstantiated. But I want you to put that aside for a second. I want you to look at the question and understand the second part, which is about helping the democratic process. That is the point here. Caroline said, you know, the blogs are unregulated comment online does not work on its own, but no one is arguing that blogs are only allowed to dominate and we should get the mainstream media out of the, you know, check them out. My other colleague, actually, on the other hand, keeps on jumping between saying that national media, big media organizations are bad in certain circumstances, and in other circumstances that they're good because they're paid journalists. And I'm not sure where they stand, because the point is that we think that national journalists or the paid media, the press, help the democratic process. But no one has yet defined what helps the democratic process. No one has said, this is what works, this is what doesn't. Do we want mediation? Sure, you can have mediation, but you might also choose to say, well, Nick Robinson, the chief political editor of the BBC, used to be head of the Young Conservatives, and therefore has a political slant that I do not agree with. But where are you going to make that point heard? Who are you going to tell that to? How are you going to challenge Nick Robinson? You're not going to challenge that on the BBC website, because half the time their complaints process doesn't work properly. My point that I'm trying to make is that this is a debate which has been turned on its head by saying the word inclusiveness, that political blogging is not inclusive. Maybe, but then let's get rid of Parliament. The Parliament is not inclusive either. Let's get rid of the entire media industry. The media industry is male-dominated, it's middle class, and it's mostly from London. So are those people inclusive? If they're not inclusive, then what are we going to do about that? Because that's one of the things that we argue for as bloggers, that we want our political class to be more inclusive, that we want our media to be more inclusive. Who is campaigning for that? Certainly not the media and the political classes. We're the people doing it online. Last point is that the point about online blogging, the point about online comment, is to try and engage other people. And the beauty of the internet is that you can have a lot of people finding innovative ways to engage people. You can have someone setting up their own little YouTube channel. Someone can set up their Twitter feed to engage other people who go out and campaign for Labour or Conservatives. You can try and find different ways to engage people. That is what will help the democratic process. Don't let other people say that we will define what helps the democratic process. We will mediate the conversation, because that is not going to help democracy.
Thank you. Last word from the opposing side, Caroline Thompson.
Well, thank you. And so I agree with Sonny. What we should do is look at the motion we're being asked to debate, and it is unregulated political comment. It is not, is online in general a good thing? It is not, does it provide useful information or facts or whatever that might help? It's about unregulated political comment. And my contention, our contention, is simply that unregulated political comment online is a contribution to the democratic process in the way, as Steve says, that debates in the pub are. But it's not the key thing that helps democracy work. The key thing that helps democracy work, and I unashamedly say this, is I believe in journalism. And I'm slightly surprised that Paul, as a lecturer in online journalism, doesn't believe in it more as well. I believe in journalism because in the end, journalism is about training people, It's about training them so they can analyze facts, they can differentiate between what they're told, what's accurate and what isn't, and then they have a code of conduct. Even journalists on newspapers have a code of conduct they have to follow. If they're working in the really regulated media like the BBC, they have very detailed, as it says here, pages and pages of guidelines which govern how they work. And that means that they're not allowed to bring their own political opinions into what they do and say. They have to tell us what they think has actually happened. They have to give some sort of analysis of it. And I believe that helping people understand the issues, not just saying, are they in favor of the NHS or not, but understanding the issues around funding the NHS, that if they're in favor of it, that they might need to spend more money on it, that you might look at how you regulate it, that those are the things that really make a democracy work. And if we got more of that, we'd have a better functioning democracy.
Oh, there you have it. The online world is dividing people, even dividing journalists about their own profession. And Sir Bob Worcester, you have
Sir Robert
Worcester, you have the final word.
Thank you, William. I'd like to speak to Harry. I'd like to speak to Colin, one or two others that I've heard from who are undecided, particularly. And I would like to remind you of some of the things that my esteemed opponent on this motion said during her remarks. She said she wasn't speaking against the motion, so we agree. She said that you can't do regulation of the internet, so we agree. And then she said there was a role for unregulated content, so we agree. And I much appreciate the support. But she then went on to say that she was concerned about unstructured opinion because people didn't necessarily know what they were talking about, not like professional journalists. Readers were left confused. And Paul Bradshaw's excellent contribution, I thought, towards the end of the discussion, I believe he would join me in saying that Caroline was, in a word, patronizing of the citizens of this country, that they're not smart enough to not be confused, and that they are unstructured in their arguments. Some are, of course, but some are not. And Stephen particularly said you can find nuggets of well-argued opinions even on the most obscure blogs, and frequently on the better, more active blogs. He also talked about Speaker's Corner, and I think what he called, well, wild men, mostly men. And I think Speaker's Corner now has gone public, and it's not confined to a very few people who go out there, as I did on my first visit to this country, I think it's 57 years ago. One of the first things I did coming from Kansas City was to go to Speaker's Corner, where democracy was flourishing, where anyone could say anything, and there was one unarmed policeman. One unarmed policeman. Now, that to me said a lot about British democracy. The argument that freedom of speech should be in some way regulated is, to me, undemocratic. My colleague said that libel can be used. Well, it can be used if you're rich, as Simon Singh is, but if you're not, the point that was made here in the front is that it was available to everyone. Well, it's not available to everyone. If you think the internet's restricted, boy, going to libel is certainly restricted.
That's why you need regulation.
That's where you, well, I don't know about that. Now, in terms of,
last words.
No, in terms of the argument that that it's not, doesn't have access to everybody, doesn't provide access to everybody, nothing does. You have to have the money to be on the internet, and only 70% of the people are on the internet. And that excludes 3 in 4 people over the age of 65. It excludes 1 in 6 of people under 25. Hands up, anyone who is not on the internet in this audience. Not a single hand has gone up. So yes, it is, but that doesn't mean that people cannot have access to it, because they can if they wish, if they can afford it, or if they have friends who allow them to. There are 23 things that I would like to be saying that I have down here. I haven't the time to do it, but I urge you to speak for a free, unregulated, democratic system, and that includes both on and off the internet. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Robert. Well, time's up, all passions spent. We have low-tech method of counting the votes, so now we're going to ask you to cast your votes for or against the motion. We'll also count the abstentions. If there are some from the Tweeters Corner, you'll let us know, Tim. So, can I ask you please to vote on the motion which says that unregulated political comment online helps the democratic process. Those in favour, please raise your hands and keep them up.
Harry is persuaded.
I'm doing it with less certainty than I had when I came in the room.
That's what we should have had a before and after vote. That would
No influencing the vote. Please keep up, just to make sure we got it. Are we all right? Okay. Those against the motion, please raise your hand. I'm not sure we're counting the speakers. I think we more or less count that as read, and the chairman can't vote. Got a very high turnout.
Very unusual for me to speak one way or the other on any motion, given the job that I do. But I was pleased to be here today. But the Independent on Sunday rang me yesterday they were doing a canvass, a poll you might say, of pollsters to ask how the election was going to come out. And I said, put me down as a don't know.
We'll quote you on that. And abstentions, please. Very good. We've had very persuasive speakers from here, obviously. Colin, that's great. We'll be fighting for your last vote.
I'll have a word with you after.
Yeah, very good, very good, very good. Okay, can I just have the figures for the record?
I think we demand a recount already.
Absolutely. We want the half votes registered.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, yeah. At least there's no need for a coalition. I don't think it's a hung parliament, is it?
Yeah.
Comparing votes.
Very unrepresentative.
Lots of people on Twitter.
Yeah.
Well done.
Well,
Right, that's pretty clear cut. Just for the record, everybody, the voting was as follows: for the motion, 40; against the motion, 15, with 1 abstention. So this House believes that unregulated political comment online helps the democratic process. So time for our thank yous. Thank you to the Frontline Club, to the UK National Commission for UNESCO, especially Tim Gopsell, team leader of this year's organisation, and Ian White, who kept the show on the road in the office, Harry Reeve for coming especially for the occasion, the BBC College of Journalism with David Haywood, and Tom Fredericks, who created the setup video. Thank you very much to the invited speakers, all of you. And I'll end this, because this is World Press Freedom Day, with one more quote from a man who has done as much as anyone in the world in the last 6 years to hold states to their commitments on media freedom and the protection of journalists from arbitrary arrest or physical attack. It's Miklos Horsty. He's the outgoing representative on freedom of the media of the OSCE. He said simply that the most drastic attack on freedom of expression is when journalists are killed for doing their job. And the only thing that has a more chilling effect on press freedom and freedom of expression is when such crimes go unpunished and those responsible are allowed to go free. Thank you all for coming. See you all again next year, I hope. Please enjoy the tea and coffee at the back and keep the debate going online, in print, and in the headlines.
And thank you, William.
Thank you. Remembering journalists.